When the police showed up at my door, I was running the final test on my latest lines of code. 3 officers stood on my threshold, 2 women, 1 man, their expressions carved from stone. We received a report of child abuse at this address. I blinked, sliding one ear of my headphones back. I don't have children. We need to take a look around. They swept through my 400-square-foot studio apartment. The living area, the bedroom nook, the bathroom, the tiny balcony. No child. No pets. Not even a second pair of slippers. The male officer looked at me. "Are you certain no child has been staying here?" "Positive," I said. "I'm single, I live alone, and I can barely keep a succulent alive." He frowned. I suddenly remembered something and asked, "How many times does this make?" "What?" "The reports," I said. "This month, how many times has this happened?" The male officer's frown deepened, but it was the young female officer beside him who spoke up. "Fiona, right? We're responding to a citizen's report. We need you to cooperate." Her tone carried a sharp edge of impatience, as if my question was entirely out of line. I nodded, stepping back to cede the space. "I am cooperating. Please look around. If you need me to open a cabinet or move something, just say the word." My attitude was as accommodating as possible. I knew better than to argue. This was the 3rd time this month. The first time was at 11 on a Tuesday night. Someone had reported hearing a child screaming in my apartment. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, racing to meet a project deadline, let alone a child crying. I wouldn't have heard a thunderstorm outside. They did a quick sweep, apologized politely, and left. The second time was last Thursday afternoon. The accusation had escalated to child imprisonment. That search was far more invasive. They made me open my closets and check under the bed. The result, of course, was the same. My apartment was cleaner than my conscience. Now, child abuse. The allegations were growing heavier with each call, and I already had a very good idea of who was behind them. The male officer, let's call him Detective Garrett, seemed to have more miles on him. He moved slowly through my apartment, his eyes taking in every detail. His gaze drifted over my bookshelves, heavy with texts on system architecture and programming algorithms. Then over to my desk, where 3 monitors glowed with dense, nested lines of code. Finally, he looked out at the balcony. I turned the balcony into a small reading nook, a single beanbag chair, and a low side table. On the table sat a ceramic ashtray with a couple of cigarette butts. "Do you work from home?" Garrett asked. "Yes. I'm a freelance game developer." "You live alone? Rarely go out?" "Mostly just for groceries or when I need a walk to clear my head." He nodded, taking another look at the room, which was tidy to the point of obsession. "Can you tell me who filed the report?" I finally asked. Garrett looked at me, silent. The young officer spoke up again. "We can't disclose that. We're legally obligated to protect the caller's anonymity." A dry, bitter laugh escaped my throat. "Right. I understand." Of course I understood. But the anger inside me was starting to claw at my ribs. The calls were anonymous, but it didn't take a genius to figure it out. This was a high-end building. The residents were generally professional and kept to themselves. Everyone maintained a polite, unspoken agreement to mind their own business. Everyone except him. My neighbor across the hall, Connor. A handsome single father with a 5-year-old daughter named Mia. The same man who, on my second week here, had knocked on my door holding a warm bowl of homemade soup and a dazzling smile. "Are we done here?" I asked. "If so, I'd like to get back to work. I have a client waiting on this build." Garrett exchanged a look with his colleague. "We're done for today. Sorry for the disruption, Fiona. But we do advise you to remain mindful. Multiple reports usually mean there's some kind of smoke." The young officer's words felt like a deliberate needle. Some kind of smoke? The anger I'd been suppressing flared white-hot. "Officer," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "are you suggesting that despite 3 empty searches, I'm still a suspect in abusing a child who doesn't exist?" "That's not what I meant," she said, her cheeks flushing slightly as she realized she'd crossed a line. "Then what did you mean? You show up at my door, disrupt my work, and violate my privacy. My time is money, and my reputation isn't a playground. Or is a single woman living alone simply an easy target for suspicion?" The young officer's face turned bright red under my gaze. Garrett stepped in to smooth things over. "Fiona, let's take a breath. We understand your frustration, but we have a duty to investigate. We'll look into the origin of these calls. If we establish that this is a case of malicious harassment, we will take appropriate legal action." He handed me a business card. "If anything else comes up, or if you remember any details, call me directly." I took the card. Detective Shane Garrett, followed by a direct phone number. "Thank you." I escorted them to the door. The moment it clicked shut, the adrenaline drained, leaving me hollow. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening to their retreating footsteps. Then, through the peephole, I caught the briefest flicker of a shadow disappearing behind the door across the hall. I sat back down at my computer, but the code on the screen had turned into an illegible blur. My chest felt tight, like it was stuffed with wet cotton. I picked up my phone, opened an online retail app, and typed into the search bar, letter by letter. Miniature, high definition, night vision camera. And then, high sensitivity, directional microphone. If reason couldn't reach him, I'd have to speak a language he understood. 3 times this month. I swore to myself, it would be the absolute last. My new neighbor, Connor, had moved in 3 months ago. The move-in day had been loud. Even with my headphones on, I could hear the heavy thuds in the hallway and the high-pitched giggles of his daughter, Mia. Out of basic neighborly courtesy, I opened my door to check. He was standing in the corridor, directing the movers. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, his hair styled in a neat crop, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. He looked flustered, but still effortlessly handsome. When he saw me, he paused, then offered a warm, apologetic smile. "Hey, neighbor. I'm Connor, just moving in. Did we wake you? I'm so sorry about the racket." His voice was smooth and gentle, like a warm breeze. "It's fine," I said, preparing to close the door. "Wait," he called out. "I didn't catch your name." "Fiona." I gave him my name, figuring that was the absolute limit of my social obligation. I had no idea it was only the prologue. From that day on, my doorbell rang almost daily. "Fiona, sorry to bother you, but our Wi-Fi went down. Could you take a look? My daughter needs it for her online preschool." "Fiona, my hallway light bulb burned out. Do you have a spare ladder?" "Fiona, I made some pork rib soup. I brought over a bowl for you." A single girl shouldn't rely on takeout all the time. At first, trying to be a decent neighbor, I helped him out. Fixing his router or lending a tool took only a few minutes. But gradually, the boundaries started to blur. He began using these favors as an excuse to linger in my apartment. "Your place is so immaculate," he'd say, trying to step past the entryway. "Unlike mine. Mia leaves her toys everywhere." Then came the prying questions. "Fiona, a successful woman like you, how are you still single? Your standards must be sky high." The breaking point was the text messages. He started texting me at all hours. Sometimes it was late at night, complaints about how exhausting it was to be a single father, always accompanied by a post-workout selfie. Other times, right when I was in the zone coding, he'd send unsolicited short videos or memes. I am someone who hoards her solitude. I need large, uninterrupted blocks of time to think. Connor's presence was like a persistent car alarm outside my window, shattering my focus. So I started drawing lines. "Sorry, I'm working. I don't really know much about appliances. You should call a professional. Thanks, but I don't eat soup." My rejections were polite but blunt. I figured any reasonable adult would recognize the cold shoulder and back off. I was wrong. With every polite refusal, Connor's demeanor shifted. The warmth in his eyes hardened into something sullen and resentful. Soon after, the building's leasing office called me. They claimed they'd received complaints about my mechanical keyboard. Apparently, my late-night typing was keeping my neighbors awake. For the record, my keyboard uses silent red switches. Then came the first police visit. After the officers left that night, I went out to throw away the trash and ran into Connor and Mia coming back from the elevator. He avoided my eyes, a tight, artificial smile plastered on his face. "Fiona, what a coincidence." But Mia, cradled in his arms, pointed a finger at me and piped up. "Daddy, that's the lady. The one with the crying in her apartment." In that single second, the puzzle pieces clicked together. Connor's stiff smile looked suddenly grotesque. He had stopped knocking on my door. Instead, he had found a far more insidious way to force his way into my life. He wanted to break me. I closed the shopping app on my phone, a wave of nausea washing over me. I walked over to the window and lit a cigarette. Down in the courtyard, Connor was watching Mia ride her scooter. He wore a casual t-shirt, laughing and wiping sweat from her forehead. Passers-by smiled warmly at them, offering looks of quiet admiration. What a devoted father. Strong, optimistic, doing it all on his own. Who would suspect the rot festering beneath that handsome veneer? I took a long drag of my cigarette, letting the nicotine settle the static in my head. I wasn't going to pack up and move. I had done nothing wrong. Why should I run like a stray dog? Besides, with a man this obsessive, a new zip code wouldn't protect me. He'd find a way to trace me. Running solved nothing. When dealing with a lunatic, you can't rely on sanity. You either have to out-crazy them or out-calculate them. I chose the latter. I stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray. I sat back down at my desk and opened a fresh document. I titled it, The Counterattack. The delivery arrived the very next morning. 4 pinhole cameras, 2 button-sized microphones, and a high-capacity external hard drive. I spent the afternoon setting up the network. I'd taken a minor in cybersecurity during college, so handling the hardware and routing the feeds was second nature to me. I installed the first camera directly inside my door's peephole. From the outside, it was completely undetectable. From the inside, a micro-thin data cable ran along the frame, feeding a live view of the hallway straight to my desktop. The second camera went onto my living room window frame, disguised as an ordinary mounting screw. Its wide-angle lens captured the entire courtyard and the main entrance of our building. The third and fourth cameras were placed on opposite ends of my balcony. One pointed at my AC condenser, and the other faced Connor's balcony. Our balconies were barely 3 feet apart. There was a metal divider, but a grown man could easily vault over it if he wanted to. I had to prepare for the possibility of him doing something desperate. The microphones required a bit more finesse. I mounted the first one at the very top of my door frame, near the ventilation intake. The second one was trickier. Late that night, when the building was silent, I used an extendable rod to slide it behind the metal grates of Connor's balcony AC unit. It was perfectly concealed and close enough to his sliding door that if he left the window cracked, I'd hear everything. I knew this was a massive invasion of privacy. But honestly, to hell with his privacy. When someone uses systemic lies to dismantle your life, playing by the rules of polite society is a fool's errand. I wasn't doing this to cause harm. I was doing this to survive, to build a fortress of evidence. Every feed was routed to an old, dedicated PC in my study, recording 24/7. The data autosaved to an encrypted external drive. Once the system was live, I felt like a hunter who had finished setting her traps. Now, all I had to do was wait for the prey to take a step. I forced myself back into my routine. Coding, debugging, testing. The only difference was that I spent an hour every evening reviewing the previous day's footage at double speed. For a few days, it was quiet. No police. No texts. Even when we crossed paths in the hallway, Connor kept his head down and brushed past me as if I were a stranger. For a brief, fleeting moment, I wondered if I'd overreacted. Maybe he'd given up? Then I watched the footage from Friday night. I'd stayed up late trying to squash a stubborn bug in my code. The timestamp on the recording read 2:14 a.m. My front door didn't open, but a shadow crossed the frame. Slowly, silently, a black trash bag was slid through the narrow gap beneath my door's heavy seal. Then the shadow vanished. I stood up from my chair and walked to the entryway. There it was, a small black plastic bag sitting on my welcome mat. I put on a pair of latex gloves and carefully opened it. Inside was a wet slurry of rotting food scraps and potato peels. The stench was immediate and foul. Instead of getting angry, I smiled. Finally, the mask was coming off. I took high-res photos of the bag, stored them, and threw the trash into the hallway chute. Back at my computer, I clipped the video segment and saved it under a new folder. Exhibit 1, Midnight Delivery. I knew this was just the appetizer. The real feast was on its way. Over the next week, Connor's petty campaign escalated into something almost theatrical. On Monday, he coated my doorknob in industrial superglue. If I hadn't made it a habit to check the hallway camera before leaving, my hand would have been fused to the brass. Exhibit 2, Sticky Note. On Wednesday, an empty cardboard delivery box I'd left outside my door to take down later was defaced. Someone had drawn a giant turtle across the front in black Sharpie, with the word coward written in block letters. Exhibit 3, Masterpiece. By Friday, today, it got worse. While I was downstairs picking up a food delivery, he used red spray paint to deface my door. A single, dripping word, die. The peephole camera captured the entire performance. He wore a black hoodie and a surgical mask, thinking he was anonymous. But he'd forgotten about the wide-angle lens. The feed showed him slipping out of his own apartment, painting the door, and then retreating back into his unit, looking around like a thief in the night. Watching his frantic, self-satisfied little scurrying on screen, I didn't feel rage, only pity. How hollow does a 30-something man's life have to be for him to dedicate this much energy to schoolyard vandalism? I didn't scrub the paint off. In a way, I liked it. It was a badge of honor, a testament to his unraveling. I saved the clip as Exhibit 4, Death Threat. I was perfectly calm. I coded, I reviewed my feeds, I compiled my evidence. I felt a strange, quiet thrill. I was waiting to see what his next move would be. All I had to do was sit back, watch the show, and hit record. It was a beautiful feeling. It took me 48 hours to realize that Connor wasn't just a bitter, petty Narcissist with an ego bruised by a neighbor's rejection. He was a strategist. A crude one, but a strategist nonetheless. The realization didn't come to me during the day. It came at 3:17 a.m. on Tuesday, while I was sitting in the dark of my living room, wearing my studio headphones, running a spectral analysis on the audio captured by the balcony microphone. I had isolated a 3-minute snippet recorded the previous night, right before his third call to the police. Through the directional mic, mounted behind his AC compressor, the ambient sounds of the city, distant highway hum, the wet slap of tires on asphalt, had been filtered out by my noise gate software. What remained was the quiet, localized audio inside his sliding door track. I played the file at triple gain. Click. The distinct, metallic snap of a cheap Bluetooth speaker turning on. Then a faint rhythmic static. A second later, the sound began, a child's. Shrill, panicked crying, punctuated by high-pitched shrieks. It lasted precisely 45 seconds. Then, a quiet tap on a touch screen. The audio cut off instantly. No fade-out.
No lingering sniffles.
No rustle of clothing or footsteps moving across a room to comfort a distraught toddler. Just dead silence, followed 3 seconds later by Connor's low, clear voice, speaking into his phone. Yes, 911? I'm reporting an emergency across the hall. It's happening again. The woman in 4B. I sat frozen in the blue glow of my triple monitors, my hands hovering over the mechanical keyboard. The sound of the crying hadn't come from Mia. It was an MP3 file. He had bought or downloaded a sound effect of a child screaming, connected his phone to a portable speaker, pressed it against the shared ventilation duct that ran through our wall, played it for under a minute, and then dialed the police. I leaned back in my chair, my heart rate steady, almost unnaturally low.
Why?
Why go through the elaborate, legal risk-heavy process of planting 3 separate police reports? If he just wanted to harass me, the glue, the trash, and the red paint were enough. Why involve Detective Garrett? Why risk filing false emergency reports, which carry actual jail time if exposed? I pulled up a blank text file and started mapping out his logic tree like I was designing an enemy AI pathfinding algorithm in C++. Premise 1. A single noise complaint gets a warning from the leasing office. Premise 2. A second report gets an intrusive police search. Premise 3. A third report establishes a documented pattern of suspected violence or instability. Conclusion. He wasn't trying to get me fined. He wasn't even trying to get me evicted. He was establishing a paper trail. He was building an official, state-sanctioned record that Fiona, in apartment 4B, was an unhinged, violent woman with a dark, hidden compulsion involving children. He was laying the foundation for a masterstroke. And if he was laying the foundation for a crime involving a child, what was he planning to do with Mia? A cold thrill ran down my spine. Not fear, clarity. The kind of sharp, crystal focus that hits you when you finally spot the memory leak that's been crashing your entire server architecture for weeks. Connor wasn't just playing a prank. He was setting up a fall. The next morning, I didn't work on my game. I opened a secondary browser tab, using a hardened VPN, and ran a deep background search on Connor Vance. It's astonishing what you can find when you know how to query public registries, property deeds, and court dockets instead of just Googling a name. Connor hadn't moved into our high-end building because he was thriving. He had moved in because he was hiding. 6 months ago, a family court judge in Ohio had issued a temporary custody modification order. Connor's ex-wife, a pediatric nurse named Sarah, had been granted primary custody of Mia after Connor's logistics firm went under, leaving him with over $200,000 in unsecured commercial debt. He had absconded with Mia 3 months later, hopping state lines, paying 6 months of rent up front on our luxury studio, using what was likely the last of his liquidated business assets. He was a man running out of time, running out of money, and facing a pending federal warrant for custodial interference. I stared at the digitized court documents on my screen. He didn't just want to punish me for ignoring his charming, single dad routine. He needed a distraction. A violent, chaotic smokescreen that would explain why his daughter suddenly went missing from the building without the authorities looking at him. If Mia vanished from his apartment tomorrow, where would the police look first? They wouldn't check the airport. They wouldn't check his bank accounts. They would immediately smash down my door, armed with 3 prior 911 reports of child abuse occurring in Unit 4B. By the time Detective Garrett realized the reports were fake, Connor and Mia would be across the border, or Connor would be collecting an insurance payout, or worse, he was going to frame me for the abduction, or harm of his own daughter. I let out a slow, controlled breath. I looked at the red paint on my front door through the peephole camera feed. The word die, still wet and tacky around the edges. Unbelievable, I whispered to the empty room. He really thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. He thought I was just an antisocial, soft-spoken girl who wrote code in her pajamas and cowered behind a double-locked door.
He thought my silence was
Weakness. He had no idea that to a systems programmer, human behavior is just another set of conditional statements. If trigger, then action.
I didn't call Detective Garrett.
Not yet. If I called Garrett now with a court docket from Ohio and a few surveillance clips of trash being dropped at my door, Connor would deny it. He'd claim he was a desperate father being harassed by an obsessed neighbor. Garrett would call it a civil dispute, hand me another business card, and tell us both to go to mediation. And Connor would adapt. He'd change his plan, accelerate his timeline, and do something even more reckless.
No.
You don't alert the bug until you've isolated it in a sandbox environment, where it can't corrupt the rest of the system. I needed him to commit fully. I needed him to execute his final move right into the line of sight of every lens I had mounted. Thursday night brought a torrential rainstorm. Thunder rattled the double-paned glass of my studio window, and rain lashed the building's concrete facade in violent sheets. The courtyard 4 floors below was a churning lake of black water and yellow street lamp reflections. At 11:40 p.m., my local monitoring software threw a silent, red-bordered alert on my secondary screen. Motion detected. Hallway north/peephole camera. I clicked the window. The hallway was dim, lit only by the emergency overhead sconces. Connor emerged from his apartment. He wasn't wearing his usual crisp linen or casual workout gear.
He wore dark
gray sweatpants, a rain jacket, and rubber-soled boots. In his right hand, he carried a heavy-duty plastic wedge and a thin, flexible strip of steel, a slim gem, the kind car thieves use or lockpickers use for simple latch bolts. He didn't look at my peephole. He had no reason to think a standard brass door. I held an 8K sensor connected to a neural network running real-time facial recognition. He stood outside my door for 20 seconds, listening. I sat motionless at my desk, my fingers resting lightly on my mouse. Through the hallway microphone, I heard the faint, metallic scrape of his tool, slipping into the gap between my door frame and the heavy mortise lock. My heart gave a single, hard thud against my ribs. He was trying to pick my lock while he thought I was asleep. I didn't panic. I reached over, tapped a hotkey on my keyboard, and disabled the automated smart latch mechanism I'd installed 2 days prior. I wanted him to get in.
No, not yet.
I let him struggle with the physical pin tumbler for another 10 seconds. Then, very deliberately, I stood up from my desk, scraped the wooden legs of my chair loudly against the hardwood floor, and took 3 heavy steps toward the
entryway.
The sound carried through the door. On the screen, Connor froze instantly. His head snapped toward my door, his eyes wide, pupils dilated in the dim light. He snatched his tools back, took 2 silent steps backward, and slipped into the shadows of the stairwell door at the end of the hall. Exhibit 5. Attempted breaking and entering. I didn't open the door.
I didn't yell.
I walked back to my desk, opened the surveillance log, and checked the timestamp. He was getting desperate. His timeline had moved up. The rainstorm provided perfect cover, low visibility, loud ambient thunder to drown out physical noise, and reduced response times for local police patrols. Tonight was the night. 10 minutes later, my balcony microphone picked up the wet, rhythmic scrape of rubber boots on iron. He wasn't trying the front door anymore. He was on the balcony. My studio apartment's balcony was small, roughly 6 feet wide by 4 feet deep. The metal railing was separated from Connor's balcony by a narrow 3-foot gap, across which ran the building's external drainage pipe. In heavy rain, the balcony was a blind spot for the building's courtyard. Security. Connor had climbed over the divider. I watched him on camera 3, the screw cam mounted on the corner of my sliding glass door frame. He was dripping wet, his rain hood pulled low over his face. He was crouched on my balcony, right next to the small reading nook I'd built. He was holding a small, brightly colored object in his gloved hand. I zoomed in using the optical lens control on my desktop interface. It was a small, pink, glittery child's shoe. Mia's shoe. He reached down and wedged the shoe deep behind the heavy metal housing of my outdoor AC condenser unit, pushing it into the dark gap where no one would see it unless they were actively searching the balcony with a flashlight. I watched him do it. My mind analyzed the move instantly. Step 1. Hide the child's missing shoe on Fiona's balcony. Step 2. Return to his apartment. Hide Mia in a closet or transfer her to an accomplice and call 911. Step 3. Tell the police Mia was dragged away through the adjoining balcony. Step 4. Detective Garrett arrives, executes an emergency search of Fiona's unit, finds Mia's shoe hidden on the balcony. Step 5. Fiona is taken into custody for
Kidnapping.
case closed. Connor disappears into the night as the tragic victim. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. He pulled himself back up, prepared to vault back over the 3-foot gap to his own balcony. That was the moment I decided to stop recording and start playing. I stood up from my desk. I didn't reach for a knife or pepper spray. I reached for my phone, hit a preset macro on my home automation system, and unlocked the sliding glass door. Then, I pulled the heavy blackout curtain aside and stepped directly onto the balcony, into the driving rain. Connor had one leg over the metal divider when the glass door slid open. He froze, suspended in midair above the 4-story drop to the concrete courtyard below, rain pouring off the brim of his hood into his eyes. I stood in the doorway, wearing a gray wool sweater, holding a steaming mug of hot water in both hands. The rain splashed against my face, cold and needle-sharp. We stared at each other for 3 long seconds over the sound of the howling wind and roaring thunder. Taking a night walk, Connor? I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, carrying effortlessly over the storm. His face underwent a grotesque transformation, from shock to terror to a sudden, ugly surge of rage. He scrambled back over the divider, landing heavily on my balcony tiles with a wet thud. He stood between me and the edge, blocking my view of his apartment. Fiona, he hissed, wiping rain from his mouth. What the hell are you doing?
Up.
I work night shifts, I said calmly, taking a sip from my mug. I told you that 2 weeks ago, when you brought over that soup. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was larger than me by at least 60 pounds and 8 inches of height. Up close, in the dark, with the rain slicking his pale hair to his forehead, he looked nothing like the charming single father who helped neighbors with their Wi-Fi. He looked hollow, desperate. You need to go back inside, he said, taking a half step toward me. His tone was low, threatening. You didn't see anything. I saw plenty, I replied. I saw you wedge Mia's pink shoe behind my AC unit. It's a size 11, right? The one with the light-up soles? Connor stopped dead. His eyes darted to the dark space behind the metal unit, then back to my face. You're crazy, he sneered, though a twitch developed in his left eyelid. You're fucking insane. You've been hallucinating for a month. The police know all about you. They have 3 files on you, Fiona. 3. Actually 4, I corrected gently. If we count the incident report detective. Garrett is going to open in about 6 minutes. He took another step forward, crowding me into the narrow door frame. The heat off his body smelled of stale sweat and wet wool. Listen to me, you pathetic little bitch, he whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. Nobody believes you. You live alone in a box. You
Talk to no one.
You have no friends, no boyfriend, no life. Who do you think the cops are going to believe? A devoted father whose daughter just went missing, or the freak across the hall who screams at night? I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I looked into his eyes, observing the tiny burst blood vessels in his sclera, the tremor in his jaw. You're right about one thing, Connor, I said softly. I do live in a box.
But
You forgot something very important about people who live in boxes. What? He spat. We build systems. I raised my right hand. In my palm wasn't a weapon, it was my phone, its screen, glowing brightly despite the rain. On the display was a live, 4-quadrant video grid. Quadrant 1, high-definition 4K footage of him drawing the word die on my door. On Friday. Quadrant 2, clear audio waveform rendering of his Bluetooth speaker, playing the child crying loop near my air vent. Quadrant 3, crystal clear video of him picking my front door lock 20 minutes ago. Quadrant 4, the current, live feed from the camera hidden in my AC condenser housing, showing his face as he planted Mia's pink shoe 5 minutes ago. At the top of the screen, a bold green status bar read, streaming live to dept_Garrett_feed/911_dispatch_portal. Connor's breath caught in his throat. The color drained from his face so fast he looked instantly ill. What is that? He stuttered. It's my counterattack, I said. Every frame of video, every byte of audio, every attempt at breaking and entering, time-stamped, cryptographically signed, and uploaded to a cloud server in real time, automatically mirrored to Detective Shane Garrett's personal work phone. Every time motion was detected on my threshold. I paused, letting the rain fill the silence between us. I didn't block your harassment, Connor. I indexed it. For a second, I thought he was going to throw me off the balcony. The tension in his shoulders coiled tight, his eyes wild, looking like a cornered animal calculating whether it could kill its way out of a trap. He reached for my throat. You bitch.
Wail.
Far below, down on the rain-drenched street, a red and blue strobe light burst. Through the gloom. Then another. Then a third. The sharp, wailing screech of police sirens bounced off the surrounding brick buildings, echoing up the concrete atrium. 3 squad cars pulled onto the curb in front of the lobby doors, their tires screeching against the asphalt. Connor turned his head toward the street, his face illuminated by the flickering red and blue reflections in the rain. Detective Garrett was very interested in the video. I emailed him 10 minutes ago. I said, my voice cold and dry. The one where you were on the phone with your offshore broker, discussing how to take Mia across the border to avoid your custody warrant in Ohio. I believe he called it actionable evidence of parental abduction. Connor turned back to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water.
Mia.
He rasped. Where is Mia? She's in your master bedroom closet, I said. Safe, wearing noise-canceling headphones, watching cartoons on her tablet because you gave her a dose of pediatric Benadryl at 9 o'clock. You left her alone to frame me. He stumbled back, his heel catching on the edge of my beanbag chair. He nearly lost his balance, grabbing the iron railing to steady himself. You ruined me, he choked out, tears of panic finally mixing with the rainwater streaming down his cheeks. You ruined my life. I just needed time. I just needed them to look somewhere else. You ruined yourself the moment you thought my solitude made me vulnerable. I
said.
Heavy, thunderous footsteps echoed from inside the building's hallway.
Bang, bang, bang.
Police. Open up. Connor Vance, we have a warrant for your arrest. Garrett's voice roared through the hallway door, followed immediately by the heavy metallic crunch of a battering ram hitting Connor's front door across the
hall.
Connor looked at me one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated terror, and tried to swing his leg back over the divider to escape into his unit. I wouldn't do that, I said calmly. He didn't listen.
He jumped.
His wet boot slipped on the slick iron frame of his own balcony railing. He let out a sharp, pathetic yell as his body pitched sideways into the open
air.
For one sickening second, he hung suspended over the 4-story drop. Then his fingers caught the lower crossbar of the balcony frame. He slammed heavily against the concrete exterior wall, dangling in the dark, screaming for help as the rain poured over him. Fiona, help me.
Please.
Grab my hand. I walked to the edge of my balcony. I looked down at him. His fingers were slipping against the wet, painted metal. I didn't reach down. I didn't panic. I picked up the small, pink, glittery child's shoe from behind my AC unit, held it in my hand, and looked down into his terrified eyes. You shouldn't leave your daughter's things outside, I said softly.
It's
raining. 5 seconds later, the balcony door to Connor's apartment smashed open from the inside. Detective Garrett and 3 uniformed officers burst onto his balcony, grabbed Connor by his wrists, and hauled his shaking, sobbing body over the ledge onto the concrete floor. The hallway smelled of ozone, wet leather, and crushed plaster. Connor's front door was splintered, hanging off its hinges. 2 officers led Connor out in handcuffs. He was drenched, shivering his face, covered in gray grime from the balcony floor, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. As he was escorted toward the elevator, he didn't look at me once. A female officer came out of his apartment carrying Mia, who was wrapped in a dry yellow blanket, blinking sleepily at the bright hallway lights, completely unaware of the nightmare that had almost consumed her. Detective Garrett stood in the doorway of my apartment. He had taken off his wet hat. His trench coat was soaked at the shoulders. He looked at me, then looked past me into my studio, at the triple monitors, the glowing green server racks, the clean, quiet order of my 400 square
feet.
He took out a cigarette, looked at the "no smoking" sign in the hall, sighed, and put it back in his pocket. You set up a whole intelligence network in 48 hours? Garrett asked, his tone a mix of disbelief and sheer exhaustion. I had the hardware lying around, I said, leaning against my door frame.
I
work in system architecture. It wasn't complicated. Garrett rubbed his face with a heavy hand. He was planning to file the missing person report in 20 minutes, Garrett
said softly.
He had a suitcase packed in his trunk. He was going to leave the girl with an associate in New Jersey and fly to Mexico by morning. I know, I said. I heard him talking on his balcony mic at 10:15 p.m. Garrett stared at me for a long moment. There was something in his eyes now, not the impatience of the young female officer from weeks ago, and not the routine cynicism of a veteran cop.
It was respect,
mixed with a very healthy dose of caution. Fiona, Garrett said slowly, if you ever decide to switch careers from game development, don't go into crime. The department couldn't handle you. I offered him the faint shadow of a smile. I don't like crime, detective. It's inefficient. Too many unstructured variables. Garrett let out a dry, breathy laugh, shook his head, and handed me a small carbon copy form. We'll need you to come down to the precinct tomorrow afternoon to sign the formal evidence chain of custody statements for those video files. But for tonight, get some sleep. Thank you, detective. He turned and walked down the hall toward the elevator, his heavy boots squeaking against the wet linoleum. By 3 a.m., the hallway was quiet again. The maintenance team had placed a temporary wooden sheet over Connor's broken
door frame.
The red spray paint on my door had been scrubbed off by a night janitor using industrial solvent, leaving only a faint, dull shadow on the lacquer where the word die had been. I closed my front door. I locked the mortise bolt. I engaged the automated smart latch. The apartment was warm, smelling faintly of tea and rain. I walked over to my desk and sat down in my ergonomic chair. On my primary monitor, the 4 surveillance feeds were still running smoothly. Quadrant 1, empty hallway. Quadrant 2, rainy courtyard. Quadrant 3, quiet balcony. Quadrant 4, empty space behind the AC unit. I opened my terminal window, typed a few commands, and executed a cleanup script. Sudo rm rf/surveillance/active_logs/*. System purged. The raw footage from the last 2 weeks was compressed, encrypted with a 256-bit key, and moved to an offline cold storage drive, which I placed inside my desk drawer next to my backup hard drives. I closed the security portal. I reopened my game development suite. The lines of code I'd been working on 3 weeks ago were still there, waiting, patient and undisturbed on the screen. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. I pressed play on my favorite ambient synth playlist. The static in my life was gone. The noise had been filtered out. My hands settled onto the mechanical keyboard, and my fingers began to fly across the keys, building worlds out of logic, light, and silence.